I've been a 911 dispatcher for over 7 years. I thought I had heard it all. Screams from car crash victims, gasping breaths from people hiding from intruders, even the last words of someone who knew they wouldn't make it. But one night, I received a call that was impossible, a call that still haunts me every time the clock strikes 2:47 a.m. I remember the exact moment it happened. The fluorescent lights above my desk flickered slightly, the low hum of computers and quiet chatter from other dispatchers filling the room. It was a slow night, which usually meant the worst was coming. And then my screen lit up incoming call, unknown number. My headset crackled as I answered, 911, what's your emergency? Silence. And then breathing, shallow, fragile, a woman's breath. Please, the voice trembled, barely above, a whisper. There's someone in my house. A cold chill ran down my spine. Something about her voice was off. It had a strange distortion, as if lagging behind time. I checked the caller ID again. No name, no number, just a blank space. Impossible. Even blocked numbers show some form of data. Can you tell me your address? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Another breath. Then a choked out sob. Static crackled. I barely caught the words. He's in the hallway. I sat up straight. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I traced the call's location. It should have appeared instantly. Instead, my screen flickered, showing nothing but a loading icon. Another impossibility. Are you alone in the house? I pressed a pause. Then 3 knocks. Tock, tock, tock. Not on a door, not on a window, on the phone. The sound was so crisp, so close, as if someone was knocking from inside the call itself. My pulse spiked. I switched to the secondary system, desperate to pull an address manually. And then I saw it. A location popped up. An old house on the east side of town. My breath caught in my throat because I recognized that address. Officers are on the way, I told her. Stay on the line. She didn't respond. Instead, the breathing stopped. And then, just before the call cut out completely, a voice that wasn't hers whispered through the static, "You're too late." The police arrived at the scene within 12 minutes. I listened through their radio feed, heart pounding. They reported back almost immediately. The house was empty. No lights on, no signs of forced entry, no furniture inside. No indication that anyone had lived there for years, but that didn't make sense. I had traced the call. It came from there. One of the officers, Detective Harper, stepped inside with his flashlight raised. The beam swept over dust-covered floors, abandoned rooms, and peeling wallpaper. Then he spoke into his radio. "Dispatch, this house was abandoned over a decade ago." That was when I knew something was terribly wrong. Harper moved cautiously down the long, narrow hallway, the same hallway the woman mentioned. The air grew colder, his breath misting in front of him. He later told me that, for the first time in his career, he felt like he wasn't alone. And then he saw it. A dusty, decayed phone sitting in the middle of the hallway floor, off the hook. Harper crouched down, pressing 2 fingers to it. It was ice cold. That's when his radio crackled, and his partner's voice came through. "Harper, dispatch just confirmed. That number doesn't exist." The next morning I dug through old police reports. I had to know the truth, and when I found it, my stomach dropped. 13 years ago, a woman was murdered in that house, stabbed repeatedly, in the hallway, just inches away from the very spot where the officers found that phone. The case had gone cold, the killer never found, and the worst part, she had called 911 before she died. The transcript was eerily familiar. She had whispered the same words, "Please, there's someone in my house," right before the line went dead. My hands trembled as I closed the file. I didn't want to believe it, but then, that night at 2:47 a.m., my screen lit up again. Incoming call, unknown number. I stared at it, my pulse hammering in my ears. My breath caught in my throat as I put my headset on and answered, 9-1. "What's your emergency?" Silence, then breathing, shallow, fragile. A woman's breath, and in the distance, 3 knocks, tock, 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 and the same voice whispering through the static, "You're too late. If your phone rang at 2:47 a.m. and you heard breathing on the line, would you answer?" I never used to close my curtains at night. My apartment was on the 6th floor, and I always figured who could possibly be watching me from up here. That changed last winter. I had been living alone for about a year, a routine settling in. Wake up, go to work, come home, watch TV, scroll through my phone until I dozed off. Nothing ever happened in my life until the night I saw him. It was past midnight. I was lying in bed, my laptop propped up on my legs, the dull glow of the screen the only source of light in my apartment. The wind howled outside, rattling the old window frames. The city below was quiet, distant sirens barely audible. I don't know what made me look up, but when I did, I saw him, a man, standing outside my window. My heart nearly stopped. I live on the 6th floor, but there he was, pressed against the glass, his face partially obscured by the fog of his own breath. His eyes, they didn't blink. I scrambled back, nearly knocking my laptop to the floor. My breath came in ragged gasps. I wanted to scream, but my throat tightened, as if my body refused to acknowledge what I was seeing. How was he up here? I dared another look. He smiled, a slow, deliberate grin that sent an icy shiver through my veins. Then he raised his hand and knocked, tock, tock, tock. I bolted from my bed and ran to the living room, fumbling with my phone to call 911. My fingers were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped it. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pressed the call button. Ashton, what's your emergency? There's a man outside my window. I'm on the 6th floor. He's just standing there, staring at me. The dispatcher's voice was calm but firm. Is your door locked? I turned toward the front door. The chain was latched. The deadbolt was in place. Yes, I whispered. Stay inside. Officers are on their way. I crept back toward my bedroom, keeping the phone to my ear, my pulse hammering. Slowly, carefully, I peeked around the doorframe. He was gone. The window was empty, just the dark skyline and the flickering streetlights below. But something was wrong. The glass was fogged up, not from the cold outside, from the inside. Don't remember much after that? The police arrived about 10 minutes later. They searched the apartment, the hallways, even the rooftop. No sign of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. They didn't believe me. I could see it in their eyes. Just another case of a paranoid woman living alone, probably half asleep, imagining things. But I knew what I saw, and the worst part. They found something. When one of the officers went to check the fire escape outside my window, he noticed something odd. The metal railing was rusted through, crumbling at the slightest touch. It hadn't been used in years. There was no way anyone could have stood on it. The official report said there was no evidence of a break-in, no intruder, no footprints, no witnesses. But later that night, when I went back to bed, I noticed something on the glass, a single, perfect handprint. From the inside, if you saw someone outside your 6th floor window staring in at you, would you look away? I never believed in the supernatural. I never thought there was anything beyond death. But that changed the night I died. It started with a car crash. One moment I was driving home after a long shift, my eyelids heavy, the road stretching endlessly before me. The next, a pair of blinding headlights swerved into my lane. Metal crunched, glass shattered, pain exploded in my skull. And then nothing, not darkness, not unconsciousness. I was floating. I could see my car, a twisted wreck on the highway. Smoke billowed from the hood. My own body was slumped against the steering wheel, blood trickling down my forehead. I saw the other drivers stumbling out of their vehicle, pulling out their phone with shaking hands, but I felt nothing. No pain, no panic, just an overwhelming sense of detachment. Then I looked up, and something was looking back. A tunnel of light stretched before me, vast and endless. I felt it pulling me in, warm and inviting, but before I could move toward it, something shifted in the darkness beyond. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but then it moved. A tall, elongated figure just at the edge of my vision. Its limbs were wrong, too thin, too long. Its head tilted unnaturally as if studying me. I couldn't see its face, but I knew, deep in my bones, that it was smiling. A shiver ran through my formless body. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. I turned back toward my body, the wreckage below, desperate. I knew somehow that I had to go back. Then it spoke, not in words, not in sound, but in a whisper that crawled inside my skull. Not yet. I fell. It felt like being yanked downward at impossible speed. The tunnel of light vanished. The shadow figure grew smaller, but I could still feel its presence, watching me. Then, agony. I gasped as pain surged through my chest. A deafening ringing filled my ears. My vision blurred as I felt hands pressing against me, voices screaming. I was back. Paramedics hovered over me, their faces tight with urgency. One of them was shouting my name, their hands pressing rhythmically against my chest. I had been gone for 2 minutes, but I remember everything. I tried to tell myself it was just my brain shutting down, a near-death hallucination. But deep down, I knew better, because ever since that night I feel it watching. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I wake up gasping for breath. Something is in the room. The air turns heavy, my skin prickles, and just before I turn on the light, just before I break the silence, I hear it. That same whisper slithering through the darkness. Not yet, if you saw your own body from above. Felt the light pulling you in, but something else was waiting in the dark. Would you try to come back? I always thought people exaggerated when they talked about the deep web. Sure, I knew it was real. I knew there were hidden sites, forums, and things people weren't supposed to see. But I never thought I'd find something that would haunt me forever. It started with curiosity. A friend of mine, Dylan, was obsessed with the idea of finding some real horror online. Not just fake stories or shock videos. He wanted something truly disturbing, something that felt real. One night, after a few drinks, he convinced me to explore it with him. Just once, he said. Let's see if the legends are true. We set up a VPN, launched Tor, and started digging. We should have stopped. Most of what we found was disappointing. Weird conspiracy sites, black market listings that were clearly scams. A few live streams that made me uneasy, but nothing too horrifying. Then Dylan found it, a private chat room buried in a random forum. No name, just a string of numbers. When he clicked, a black screen loaded. Then a single message appeared. "Welcome, you shouldn't be here." We stared at each other, and then the webcam light on Dylan's laptop turned on. His hands shot up, covering it. "What the hell?" More text appeared. "We see you." I slammed the laptop shut. "Turn it off now!" Dylan was frozen, staring at the screen. His breathing was shallow, his face pale. "Dude, look at this!" Before I could stop him, he reopened the laptop. The screen was no longer black. It was showing us a live feed of 2 guys sitting in a dark room, staring at their screen in horror. Except we weren't alone. Standing right behind us, in the footage, was a tall figure, motionless, watching. But when we turned around, nothing was there. We yanked the power cord out and slammed the laptop shut. My hands were shaking. "We're done. This was a mistake." Dylan, of course, had other ideas. He booted the laptop back up. He wanted to save evidence, to prove that what we saw was real. He dug through the laptop's storage, looking for anything unusual, and that's when we found it. A new folder, one we hadn't created. It was named "Look Behind You." Dylan hesitated. Then, against every ounce of my screaming instincts, he clicked it. Inside was a single video file, titled Forbidden.mp4. I begged him not to open it, but it was too late. The video started, static, then blurry footage of a dark, windowless room, and in the middle of the frame, a chair. A person sat in it, blindfolded, tied up, their head tilted at an unnatural angle, mouth sewn shut. Then they moved. Their head jerked violently, like they were struggling to scream. A low, distorted sound filled the speakers, something between a gurgle and a sob. And then the camera turned. Slowly, deliberately, it panned away from the bound figure, towards something in the shadows, something tall, watching. The screen glitched, and then the video cut to black. We deleted the file, wiped the laptop. Dylan moved out of town a week later. I never saw him again, but the real horror, ever since that night, I've had the strangest feeling that I'm being watched. When I turn off the lights, I see shapes shifting in the darkness. When I close my laptop, I swear I hear breathing, not mine, and sometimes, when I look at my reflection in the screen, I see something else staring back. And now, I have to ask you, if you found a file on your computer named Look Behind You, would you open it? It started on a normal evening. I was walking home from work, earbuds in, lost in thought. The The street was quiet, just the occasional distant sound of a car passing by. Then I heard it, a voice, my name. It was whispered, almost drowned out by the music. I pulled out an earbud and glanced around. The sidewalk was empty, no one behind me, no one in front, but I knew what I had heard. I kept walking, my pace quickening. My apartment was only a few blocks away, and I suddenly felt an urgent need to get home. Then, just as I reached my building, a man stepped out of the shadows. He was tall, thin, dressed in a dark hoodie. His face was wrong, I can't explain. Oh, but something about it didn't belong. He smiled. "I've been waiting for you." My body locked up. My hands turned ice cold. I had never seen this man before in my life. "Who are you?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. His smile widened. "You know who I am." I didn't. I was sure of it. But as I stared into his eyes, a deep, primal fear twisted in my gut. Something was off. I turned, bolted for the front door. My keys were in my hand, shaking as I jammed them into the lock. I could feel him behind me, watching. I swung the door open and rushed inside, slamming it shut and throwing the deadbolt. My breath came in ragged gasps. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood of the door, heart hammering. He was still out. There, and he was laughing. I didn't sleep that night. Every shadow in my room felt wrong. Every creak in the apartment sent my pulse into overdrive. Then at 3:12 a.m., my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. My fingers hovered over the screen. Every instinct screamed, "Don't answer it." But I did. Silence. Then a familiar voice. "I told you. I've been waiting for you." My stomach lurched. It was him. I hung up, heart pounding. The phone rang again. I turned it off, threw it across the room. That night I barely slept, but when I did, I dreamed of him, standing at the foot of my bed, smiling. The next day, I told my friend Alex about what happened. He tried to calm me down. "Probably just some creep messing with you." I wanted to believe him. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. That evening, I took a different route home. I checked over my shoulder every few steps. I told myself I was just being paranoid, but as I neared my apartment, my stomach twisted into a knot, because standing in the exact same spot as before, he was there. Same hoodie, same grin, same dead, unblinking stare. I turned and ran. I packed a bag that night, stayed with Alex, locked all the doors, blocked the unknown number. For 2 days, nothing happened. No calls. No sightings. Then, on the third night, my phone buzzed. One new message from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. My blood ran cold. It was a picture of my apartment door, and underneath it, one final message. "You can't ignore me." Forever. If a stranger knew your name, watched you, and never stopped smiling, would you run?